whakawā.
I call Marama Fox.
E te mana whakawā nei mātou, e tāpirihia nei ngā mihi kia koutou, kua tai āti nana mai, ki te whakarongo ki ngā mihi, ki te whakarongo ki ngā kōrero, ki te tautoko i ngā mahi o te rangi nei. Tēnei mātou e hika, ka tū whakaiti kei mui a koutou. Ia hau e noho nei, i whakaro anau hika, ka noho i te whakamā. Hea hatau a whakamā, ka tiro whānui ki te whare, kai hea o tātou hoa. Te whakarongo ki ngā kōrero hōhonu, te whakarongo ki ngā kōrero. Ko takoto nei kei roto i te whare nei, kia mōhio pai rātou ki te kiko o tēnei me te tiriti o Waitangi me ngā hara, kua tau ki rungi a tātou, te iwi Māori, ki rungi a koutou. Nā reira, ia hau e noho whakamā nei, e tiro ki ngā tūru, e wātea nei, ka hiki anō te manawa i rungi te kōrero ko tō tātou parata nei, a pēni, te kōrero ana Naya, te kōrero o te minita, the Honourable Chris Finlayson. Nā kōrero nei e whakanui, e whakamana i a koutou, a hako he iti. He paunamu te kōrero. Kia kōrero tēnei kōrero i rote te whare, ka noho ki runga i ngā puka puka mo ake tonura. Nā reira ka tū whakaiti ki mui a koutou, te tautoku i ngā kōrero. E te mana whakawā, taipirangi au te mihi atu kia koutou o Tainui, kia koutou ngā uri whakaheke o te Koroki o Kahukura, koutou o te kingitanga me ki e tika me mihi kia koutou o kupau o kurahi, tēnā koutou katoa. I rise to support the third reading of Ngati Koroki Kahukura Claims Settlement Bill. I welcome you here today. Almost exactly 2 years ago, on the 20th of December 2012, the Crown and Ngati Koroki Kahukura signed a deed of settlement, agreeing to the final settlement of the non-Raupatsu Treaty of Waitangi Claims of Ngati Koroki Kahukura. In that action, the trustees of Ngati Koroki Kahukura were acting in the best interests of an estimated 4,000 members who whakapapa to that sacred maunga tautiri in the Waikato. The bill respects and protects the unique tribal structures of Ngati Koroki Kahukura and providing for the special relationship of the iwi that they have with that maunga and the Waikato River. Every one of their uri whakaheke deserves to be proud of the tribal history dating back to the 1840s and 50s and before, when they were a thriving, healthy people, when they successfully traded with one another and with the European settlers, when they enjoyed, not just survived, the life that they lived. However, by the late 1850s, there was rising tension over the land alienations. Ngati Koroki Kahukura actively supported the establishment of the kingitanga and, in an effort to safeguard their lands from alienation, placed their lands under the protection of the Māori king. At the same time, their rangatira, Ti Oriori, worked to maintain cordial relationships with the Crown. This fact of history is pivotal to know. It is a context that helps us to understand where we have come from as a nation and as a whānau, hapu and iwi, into the rising tensions of the 1860s when war broke out, resulting in the deaths of some of Ngati Koroki Kahukura and the capture of others, including their esteemed rangatira, Ti Oriori. Despite their preference for peace, Ngati Koroki Kahukura were labelled rebels, and for that, under the Suppression of Rebellion Act, they had much of their land confiscated, and yet it is viewed as non-Raupatsu. But this iwi have maintained their interests in their homeland. They preserved, they retained the essence of who they were, even though their whenua was ripped out from under their feet. Maunga Tautari was and remains their tipuna, their ancestral mountains central to their identity. Yet in the 19th century, the land in and around the Maunga fell victim to Crown-imposed tenure reform. As a result, Ngati Koroki Kahukura was involved in more than 50 native land court hearings before 1901. And as a result, swamps, wetlands were drained, the Waikato River polluted, hydroelectric power schemes depleted their traditional fisheries, flooded their cultural significant sites, as we've heard. By the end of the 20th century, Ngati Koroki Kahukura have become virtually landless. Today, the bill rectifies this in some small way. This and other wrongs imposed by the Crown on Ngati Koroki Kahukura. The bill records a history of Ngati Koroki Kahukura and the Crown apology to them. The apology for the forced operation of the native land and public works legislation. The apology for the failure of the Crown to protect the traditional tribal structures of Ngati Koroki Kahukura. The apology for the Crown's failure to recognise and provide for their relationship to Maunga Tautari and the Waikato River, and the Crown's apology for policies and legislation that instigated and decimated the economic, social, environmental and cultural degradation of Ngati Koroki Kahukura and their physical and spiritual resources. That last point is particularly important. In the 1860s and on, the Crown commenced its campaign to assimilate Māori into European culture. Ngati Koroki Kahukura elders recall corporal punishment, lashings, being used to discourage them from speaking their reo, leaving behind a legacy today in which less than 5% of this people today still retain the ability to speak te reo Māori. 80 years on, and by 1950, many Ngati Koroki Kahukura migrated from their traditional rohe in search of better economic prospects. They disconnected many from their communities and local culture. In both of these critical areas, education and employment, Ngati Koroki Kahukura consider that landlessness and social deprivation have contributed to the Crown not recognising them as an iwi in their own right. E te mana whakawā. I stand to support this bill because of its role in addressing the wrongs imposed by the Crown on Ngati Koroki Kahukura. The bill enables us to look forward to a new era in the Crown's relationship with Ngati Koroki Kahukura. E te mana whakawā, Maunga Tautari is the maunga. Waikato is the awa. Through this settlement, the maunga will be a scenic reserve and will be guarded by te hāpori o Maunga Tautari. The transfer of ownership recognises the iconic and spiritual importance. The river will be managed together. Recognition of the river as tributaries, and Ngati Koroki Kahukura will have this as an area of interest, as well as Lake Arapuni and Lake Karapiro. This settlement means you can co-manage it together. Ko Ngati Koroki Kahukura te iwi. E te mana whakawā, the Crown confirms that it is deeply sorry and profoundly apologises to the ancestors and descendants of Ngati Koroki Kahukura for the hardships they have endured. The way that they have been treated and engaged with other iwi and the wider community during negotiations is a good example for the Crown, which, in its longer history of dealing with Ngati Koroki Kahukura, was guilty of shutting them out. The graciousness of Ngati Koroki Kahukura during these negotiations has been a defining characteristic of this settlement. Mr. Speaker, had the Crown possessed the same virtues in its dealings with Ngati Koroki Kahukura, then the anguish and injustices that have brought us here today may well have been avoided. E te mana whakawā ka tūake au ki te tautoko I tēnei pere. Hioi anō rā ki a koutou kua tai a tinana mai. Te whakarongo a taringa, te kite a karu, te whakarongo a wairua hoki. Nei rā te mihi atu ki a koutou katoa. Nei rā te mihi whakaiti kai mui I a koutou. Nei rā te mihi whakanui I a koutou katoa. te whakamana i a koutou katoa, te whakahōnore i a koutou katoa, i roto i tēnei kua whakapau werawera, kua whakapau kaha, kia tūtuku i tēnei pere ki mui a tātou. Tēnei te mihi ki a koutou katoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.